Jimmy was one of my dearest friends. I'm one of the closest friends I've ever had in the world, and I loved him. But Jimmy Dean was Jimmy Dean, and Patsy Cline was Patsy Cline.
At 88 years old, country music icon Bill Anderson has finally broken his silence, and what he reveals about the late Jimmy Capps is something fans were never prepared for. This is not just another country music memory, but a hidden story from the heart of the Grand Ole Opry that was never fully told until now. Behind the stage lights and timeless songs, there was a bond, a friendship, and moments that quietly shaped country music history in ways most people never knew. What really happened between these two legends, and why did Bill stay silent for so long? There's one detail he hesitates around, something left unsaid for years, quietly sitting between the lines. As he speaks, the weight of what remains unsaid lingers, and what's hidden here may change the way you hear their music forever. Who is Bill Anderson, and why does his word carry so much weight? Bill Anderson was born in Columbia, South Carolina, but grew up around Atlanta, Georgia. He was a journalism student at the University of Georgia, working as a radio DJ to pay his way through school, when he wrote a little honky-tonk song called City Lights. He was just 19 years old. That song landed in the hands of Ray Price, who recorded it in 1958 and shot it straight to #1 on the country charts. Just like that, a kid from Georgia became one of the most talked-about new names in Nashville. He signed with Decca Records almost immediately, and in 1961, the Grand Ole Opry invited him to join their cast. He was 23 years old. He went on to rack up 37 top 10 country hits, write songs that other legends like George Strait, Brad Paisley, and Vince Gill turned into smashes, and earn the nickname Whisperin' Bill for his soft, breathy, almost conversational way of singing. Nobody else sounded like him. Nobody else wrote quite like him either. In 2001, he was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. In 2002, Broadcast Music Inc. named him the first country music songwriting icon in history, putting his name alongside legends like Chuck Berry, Little Richard, and Bo Diddley. He has written songs that now sit in the Library of Congress, alongside compositions by George Gershwin, Bob Dylan, and Hank Williams. He has been a member of the Grand Ole Opry for over 64 years, longer than any other current member. When Bill Anderson speaks about the history of country music, people listen, because he did not just observe that history from a distance, he lived it from the very center. And when someone with a resume like that takes the time at age 88 to speak openly and emotionally about another person, it means something very real and very deep is being said. A boy with a guitar and a dream from North Carolina. Now let us go back to where Jimmy Capps began. Jimmy was born on May 25, 1939 in Fayetteville, North Carolina. He grew up in the nearby small town of Benson, raised in a modest family by his parents, Tommy and Alice Capps. From the very beginning, Jimmy was drawn to music like a compass pointing north. He picked up a guitar at age 12. Not because someone pushed him into it, not because his parents forced him to practice. He just heard something in those strings that spoke directly to his soul, and he never put the instrument down again. By the time he was a teenager, Jimmy was good, really good. Not just good for a kid from a small town in North Carolina, good in the way that makes professional musicians stop mid-conversation and stare with their mouths open. Then, at just 19 years old, something remarkable happened. He auditioned for the Louvain Brothers, one of the most beloved and respected duos in all of country music at the time. Brothers Ira and Charlie Louvain were known for their razor-sharp harmonies and their deeply emotional gospel-influenced sound. They were not just popular. They were revered. Charlie Louvain personally asked Jimmy to join the band. Jimmy used to say later in life that he owed his whole career to Charlie Louvain for that one moment of faith. And in December 1958, just months after that audition, 19-year-old Jimmy Capps stood on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry for the very first time, playing guitar alongside the Louvain brothers on their haunting song, Knoxville Girl. He was a teenager, standing on the most famous country music stage in the world. And from that night forward, he never truly left. The man who helped create the Nashville sound, Jimmy Capps, was the best of the best at that job. He joined the Grand Ole Opry House Band in 1967, and from that point forward, he became an absolute cornerstone of the Nashville recording scene. At the peak of his career, Jimmy averaged over 500 recording sessions every single year. Think about that number for a moment. 500 sessions. That means he was recording music almost every single day, sometimes multiple times a day. And the songs that came out of those sessions were not just good songs. They were legendary songs. Jimmy Capps played guitar on Tammy Wynette, singing "Stand By Your Man." He was there for George Jones recording "He Stopped Loving Her Today," widely considered the greatest country song ever recorded. His fingers were on the strings for Kenny Rogers and the Gambler, for the Oak Ridge Boys and Elvira, for Barbara Mandrell singing "I Was Country When Country Wasn't Cool," for George Strait performing "Amarillo by Morning," for Reba McEntire on "How Blue," for Alan Jackson on "Here in the Real World," and for Conway Twitty on "The Rose." The list goes on so long it starts to feel unreal. And yet, through all of it, Jimmy never pushed himself forward. He never demanded credit. He never called a press conference. He just showed up, played better than almost anyone alive, and went home. Brad Paisley, one of the greatest guitarists in modern country music, once described the strange and powerful feeling of being a young artist performing at the Opry, and suddenly realizing that the quiet man playing guitar behind him was the same man who had played on "He Stopped Loving Her Today," "Stand By Your Man," and "Amarillo by Morning." All of them, the same hands, the same unassuming presence. Jimmy called his approach simply being the man in back. He even named his 2080s autobiography that very phrase. He said he always felt more comfortable behind the artist. He believed his job was to serve the song and lift the singer, not to put himself in the spotlight. That kind of humility is extraordinarily rare in any profession. In the music business, it is almost unheard of. What Bill Anderson finally said. For decades, Bill Anderson and Jimmy Capps shared a working relationship that ran deeper than most people realized. Jimmy was a regular fixture in Bill's band, playing alongside the Po Folks band for years. He appeared with Bill on Country's Family Reunion, the beloved RFD TV show that Bill hosted for over 23 years. They traveled together, performed together, recorded together, and shared countless moments backstage at the Opry. Bill Anderson knew Jimmy Capps not just as a musician, but as a human being. And at 88 years old, Bill has spoken with a level of honesty and emotion that only comes from someone who has been carrying something in their heart for a very long time. What Bill revealed was this: Jimmy Capps was the emotional anchor of every room he walked into. It was not just the guitar playing, though that was extraordinary. It was the way Jimmy treated people. On stressful tour dates, when nerves were running high and tempers were short, Jimmy was calm. During complicated recording sessions when artists were struggling and producers were frustrated, Jimmy was steady. Backstage at the Opry, when young performers were terrified and veterans were worn down by years on the road, Jimmy was kind. He had a way of making every single person feel important. From the biggest stars in country music to the newest and most nervous newcomers, he gave everyone the same warmth, the same quiet encouragement, the same steady presence. But there is one detail Bill shared that carries the deepest weight. Jimmy often carried other people emotionally while quietly hiding his own burdens behind a smile. He was the support system for so many musicians, so many friends, so many colleagues. But he rarely let others see when he himself was struggling. He kept his own weight invisible because his instinct was always to lift others first. Bill Anderson, a man who has written songs about loneliness and heartbreak with more depth and precision than almost anyone alive, said that the loneliness musicians experience behind the scenes is something the public rarely gets to understand. And Jimmy Capps, the man who filled that loneliness for so many others, carried his own quietly and without complaint. That is not just the story of a great guitarist. That is the story of a great human being. There is a storyline that almost nobody talks about when discussing Jimmy Capps, and it changes how you see him completely. Jimmy was not only a performer, he was also a producer. He worked with Charlie Louvain, the very man who gave him his first break. He also worked with Jan Howard, whose duets with Bill Anderson carried so much heart for fans. He spent time behind the mixing board for the Wilburn brothers as well, quietly shaping the sound of their records. What this really shows is simple. People trusted him, not just with music, but with their voice, their emotion, and their legacy. He was not just playing behind them, he was helping tell their story. And then there is another piece of this story that deserves its own moment of recognition. When a segment of Interstate 40 in his home state of North Carolina was named after Jimmy Capps in 2024, 4 years after his death, it was a stunning and overdue recognition of how much one man from a small town had shaped American music. An entire stretch of highway, connecting communities across the state where he was born, bearing the name of a man who spent most of his life quietly serving other people's dreams. A highway named after a man who spent 6 decades refusing to stand in the spotlight. The Grand Ole Opry, and a room that carries his name. Jimmy Capps set a record that may never be broken. He played lead guitar in the Grand Ole Opry house band for over 61 years, longer than any musician in the history of the program. From his first nervous appearance as a teenager in 1958, all the way through the final years of his life, he was there. Week after week, year after year, decade after decade. The stage changed. The artists came and went. The sound of country music kept evolving. But Jimmy stayed, steady in the background, shaping it all in ways most people never noticed. In 2018, the Grand Ole Opry honored him in a deeply personal way by renaming the band room, the rehearsal space where musicians gather before each show, the Jimmy Capps Music Room. It was more than a tribute. It felt like the building itself had made room for his name. The executive producer of the Grand Ole Opry at the time said Jimmy helped define country music for more than one generation of fans. He added that every time someone somewhere plays The Gambler or He Stopped Loving Her Today, Jimmy Capps lives on in that sound, even if his name is never spoken. Fellow musicians also carried their own memories of him. Ricky Skaggs described him as a historic and remarkable figure in the Nashville sound, someone who understood music history in a way few ever could. Crystal Gale remembered meeting him when he was already considered a legend, yet still carried himself with quiet humility. and Charlie Pride called him a prose pro, someone who showed up, delivered, and lifted every recording and every Opry performance he was part of. These were not polite words said out of formality. They were real reflections from people who had stood beside him, worked with him, and felt the steadiness he brought into every room. When Jimmy passed away on June 1, 2020, at the age of 81, the country music world did not just lose a guitarist. It lost a presence that had quietly anchored it for generations. And in that silence, many realized just how much of the music had been shaped by a man most listeners had never even seen. There is something honest about Bill Anderson being the one to speak openly about Jimmy Capps. Both men entered country music in the late 1950s. Neither built their careers around attention or spotlight. Bill focused on writing songs that connected with everyday life in a direct way. Jimmy focused on playing guitar in a way that supported the artist and the song without taking attention away from them. One worked through lyrics, the other through sound, but both understood their role in making the music work as a whole. They approached their careers in a steady way. They showed up, did their jobs well, and stayed consistent over time. They were not known for chasing publicity. They were known for being reliable in the studio and on stage. On Country's Family Reunion, the show Bill hosted for more than 20 years, Jimmy was a regular part of the musical setup. He was not just there as a background guitarist. He was someone many of the artists recognized immediately because of the years they had worked with him in Nashville sessions and live performances. Bill has described Jimmy as someone who made situations easier just by being present. He did not create pressure in the room. He helped keep things calm and focused, which mattered in live recording environments where many well-known artists were involved. In an industry where relationships can shift quickly due to competition and pressure, Bill and Jimmy maintained a long-standing professional and personal connection. It was based on trust built over decades of working in the same spaces and sharing the same stages. Even now, at 88, Bill continues to speak about Jimmy in a way that keeps his role clear and visible. He makes sure people understand the kind of work Jimmy did and why it mattered in the background of so many important country music recordings and performances. What people never realized about Jimmy. When people talk about Jimmy Capps and the Nashville sound, they usually mention the big names. Producers like Chet Atkins and Owen Bradley often come up first. So do the famous artists whose voices carried those records. But the musicians behind the scenes, the ones who actually played the music, are often mentioned only briefly. Jimmy was one of those musicians from the very beginning. He was part of the early Nashville recording world during the years when the sound itself was still being shaped. Before many of the well-known country artists became major figures in the city, Jimmy was already sitting in studios, playing on sessions, helping turn simple ideas into finished songs. His guitar work became part of the foundation that helped define that era of country music. What stands out about Jimmy is not just that he was there, but how long he stayed in that role. In the music industry, most session players eventually scale back. They take fewer jobs, move into other work, or step away from the constant demands of recording schedules. Jimmy did the opposite. He kept showing up at the Grand Ole Opry week after week for more than 6 decades. He stayed active in the house band, continued working sessions, and remained present in the same musical space long after most people would have stopped. That kind of consistency is rare, especially in an industry that changes as quickly as country music has over the years. For Jimmy, it never really changed. He kept doing the same thing, at the same level, for most of his life. Bill Anderson understands that kind of consistency in a personal way. He has spent his own career writing and performing for decades, working closely with many of the same people across different eras of country music. When Bill speaks about Jimmy, it comes from that shared experience. Not from distance, but from years of being in the same rooms, on the same stages, and around the same people who built that sound together. What often gets missed is that behind some of the most important recordings in country music history were people like Jimmy Capps, who simply kept showing up and doing the work without needing attention for it. Country music has always been built on real stories, real people, and real emotion. Behind those timeless songs stood quiet figures like Jimmy Capps, who gave everything to the music without chasing fame. Now at 88, Bill Anderson is finally sharing his story. If you enjoyed this, share it with someone who loves classic country music. Drop your favorite Jimmy Capps moment in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.